This is the Emergency Medical Minute, sponsored by Mile High Ambulance. The Emergency Medical Minute is excited to announce that we are now offering AMA PRA Category 1 credits. This is accessible through our online course modules that can be accessed at www.emergencymedicalminute.org/CME-courses, or simply by clicking on the link in our show notes and creating an account.
Who has been up at triage when you've briefly swiped over someone's forehead and the reading is 98.9 and they instantly comment, well, for me, that's a fever. Has that ever happened?
Yeah.
And that same person often says, well, my pain tolerance is exceptionally higher than the average human. And well, how's your pain for your hangnail? 12. So that person, you're like, oh, do I have to really deal with the fever for me person? So is it true? Is 98.9 a fever for some people? We'll get to that. In this person's case, probably not. But in some people, it actually might be the case. So this is sort of the background inspiration for what defines a fever. So first of all, you need to know it's really hard. If you think about it, it's kind of technologically advanced to be able to measure temperature. So the first thing they did, I have to show you this picture, and those of you listening won't get to see it, but it's this crazy glass bulb that was sort of is like the size of a Christmas bulb, and it has a long glass tube attached to it. And you'd put that bulb in your mouth, and then the end of the tube would be in this little pot of water, and then you'd sit there for 20 minutes heating up the glass bulb in your mouth, and that would displace water in this kind of pot at the bottom. Then you'd let go and water would draw up the tube, and however far the water drew up the tube was how high your temperature was. This was called a thermoscope. So imagine, it's sort of a pain to swipe across someone's forehead. Imagine having them put a glass ball in their mouth for 20 minutes up at the triage desk. How efficient would that be? So this was 1600s technology. Yeah. So that's 1600s. Now let's fast forward to 1850s or so. So there's this dude whose name is Reinhold August Wunderlich. And this is a guy who had a clinic in Germany, and he thought that if you sort of measured people's temperature, you could tell what disease they have. So he'd measure all the people in his clinic's temperature and then plot it in a chart over time. And then he'd sort of predict what disease you'd have. So for example, if you had, this is the rules for typhoid. And I can't memorize them, so I have to read them. So if your temperature reaches 40 degrees on the first evening, it is not typhoid fever. Any illness in which the temperature does not reach 39.5 degrees on the evening of the fourth day is not typhoid. So you'd have to plot these long graphs and figure out what someone had for their what their disease was. So that was his contribution. As a very side note, he said, well, I measured all these people's temperature. And by the way, his thermometer was about a foot long, and it took 20 minutes to get the reading. So imagine doing this for 25,000 patients, and he did it multiple times. So he had over 1.5 million temperature readings. And his average temperature for healthy people, he just said as a footnote, it's about 37 degrees. So that's where we came up with the 98.6 is normal. So that's where that number came from. Moving forward to late 1800s, this guy named Edward Segun translated German to English, and he published this book, Family Thermometry, which sounds really exciting, a manual of thermometry for mothers, nurses, hospitalers is us, etc., and all who have charge of the sick and of the young. And so he had this awesome thermometer. Actually, I think there was some involvement with companies that made mercury thermometers. They wanted to promote this, so they put ads in Ladies' Home Journal, you better read this book if you want to be a good housewife or nurse or hospitaler. And so they had this table, and I copied part of it up there. So 0 is the 98.6, and depending on whether you were above 0 or below 0, you either had a slight fever, moderate fever, considerable fever, or high fever. If you were 5 degrees above, you were often fatal. 6 degrees above, general death. And 7 degrees above, no authenticated recovery. And I also if you're hypothermic, no known recovery, except in cholera, because cholera was a big thing in those days. And let's see. My last point is, well, this was all basically designed by the manufacturers of thermometers just to sell more thermometers to the general public. Now, so back to the question, is 98.6 really anything? As it turns out, there's a lot of different factors. So if you are taller and thinner, you tend to have a lower temperature. Morning, you have a lower temperature. If you are older, you generally run a little bit cooler than if you're younger. So there's a lot of different factors. The other crazy thing is, over the decades, the average temperature has actually been decreasing. So it goes down by about 0.5 degrees every so often. And now the real average temperature is probably closer to 97.5. So the person who says, oh, that's a fever for me, they're probably right. But we still use 38 or 100.4 as fever for study purposes.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, Health One Continental Division, and Swedish Medical Center for their financial contributions to the EMM. Donations from them and listeners like you make it possible for us to fulfill our mission of producing and spreading free medical education to the masses. If you enjoy our show, please consider making a one-time or recurring donation to help cover our operational costs and keep the EMM awesome. Click on the link in our show notes to make a donation. Thank you for listening.